Yo, what is up guys? Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So this video is a quick preview and prediction for Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castano. Now this fight goes down on the 17th of July, takes place at the A&T Center in San Antonio, Texas, and the location of this fight is definitely worth considering, given the fact that Jermell Charlo is from Texas, and Texas is a state in which has had a history of questionable decisions in the past. But nevertheless, this is a great fight on paper, and it is for the undisputed championship at 154 pounds. Brian Castano holds the WBO title, Jermell Charlo holds the IBF, WBA and WBC titles, so all of the marbles are on the line. Stylistically, this one should be a really fun fight to watch. I believe it will be competitive, and I do believe each guy has a legitimate chance of winning this fight, so I'm really looking forward to this fight. In fact, I would go as far as saying it's one of the fights that I've been looking forward to most this year, so yeah, great fight. Looking forward to it. But anyway, let's briefly break down the tale of the tape. We shall start with the unified champion, Jermell Charlo. Jermell Charlo has a record of 34 wins, 1 defeat, 0 draws. 18 of his 34 wins coming by way of knockout. Brian Castano, on the other hand, has a record of 17-0 with 1 draw. 12 of his 17 wins come by way of knockout. Jermell Charlo is listed as 5'11", with a 73-inch reach, whereas Brian Castano is listed as 5'7.5", with a 67.5-inch reach. So Jermell Charlo has a 3.5-inch height advantage, and he has an even more significant 5.5-inch reach advantage. So Jermell Charlo is considerably taller and considerably longer. All in all, he is the bigger man in this fight, and that could definitely play a factor come fight night. Jermell Charlo is an orthodox fighter, whereas Brian Castano is also an orthodox fighter. Jermell Charlo is 31 years old, as is Brian Castano. So there we go, the tale of the tape is now out of the way. Now let's break down what I believe each guy should do in order to stand the best chance of winning this fight, and at the end of this video I will make my official prediction. But anyway, I guess I shall start with the underdog, Brian Castano. As we know, Brian Castano is the much smaller man in terms of height, reach, and even weight. Him boxing this fight on the outside, I can't really see that working out for him, to tell you the truth. Brian Castano can actually box on the outside to a certain extent, but at this level, against this level of opponents, I don't really believe he will have all that much success on the outside against a taller, longer and explosive guy like Jermell Charlo. And also, I think the longer Jermell Charlo keeps Brian Castano on the outside in this fight, the more likely he is to walk him into a big shot and maybe knock him out. So, to me, the key for Brian Castano in this fight is to basically smother Jermell Charlo. Jermell Charlo generates good power on the outside and at mid-range, with that straight right hand on the outside and those hooks up close. But if you can actually get on Jermell Charlo's chest, I do believe you can smother his power and work this guy on the inside. Jermell Charlo, while I'm not saying he's a bad inside fighter, inside fighting isn't really his forte, and when he's up close, he's not as great at generating power on those shots, and sometimes his head positioning, his defense up close isn't the greatest. We saw that in the Tony Harrison rematch, and even to a certain extent in the fight with Jason Rosario. If you can stick to Jermell Charlo's chest, you can land, and his work coming back, in my opinion, isn't as effective. So to me, the key for Brian Castano is getting to the inside and basically sticking there, smother Jermell Charlo like a blanket, essentially. And obviously, to get to the inside, Brian Castano definitely needs to be careful. Jermell Charlo can time a guy with that straight right hand coming in, and also that left hook at mid-range as a guy's coming in. So Brian Castano needs to be aware of his counter punches coming back from Jermell Charlo, because he can definitely hurt you. So, Brian Castano needs to be defensively aware as he's coming forwards. In Brian Castano's career to date, I actually quite like the high guard. in which he's deployed in his fights, and I like the way he jabs while moving on the front foot to close the distance and get to the inside. What you'll see Brian Castano doing is he'll throw the jab, he'll step into the jab, and he'll use the double jab to get to the inside. On top of that, not only will he just use that jab, he will feint the jab as well to keep his opponent guessing and, to change the look as he comes in to get to the inside. So that is something that Brian Castano will need to do in this fight. Also, Brian Castano is great at coming in at angles and attacking that way. He's great at keeping his opponents guessing, and, he needs to bring those tricks out in this fight with Jermell Charlo. Jermell Charlo doesn't always adjust the quickest in fights, so the constant changes of looks, tactics to get on the inside could pose Brian Castano's chances very well, in my opinion. And also, of course, come in and change the level. Don't just come in upright, feint, move your head, come in low, try to get in underneath Jermell Charlo's shots, maybe feint, draw the lead, come underneath and then work. Brian Castano also uses pretty good head movement as he's coming forwards, so he needs to utilise all of these tools he uses to get to the inside against Jermell Charlo, because if he leaves those at the door and gets careless, he could definitely walk into a big shot that he doesn't see coming. So yeah, the entry to the inside for Brian Castano is very important, and obviously when he's on the inside, he needs to be working. He needs to be constantly working on the inside, working the body of Jermell Charlo, coming up the middle with uppercuts. The uppercut on the inside is a shot that can really work against Jermell Charlo. Like I said earlier, Jermell Charlo's head positioning on the inside isn't the greatest, and he's available for the uppercut, which Brian Castano throws very well. So the uppercut on the inside could be a very key shot for Brian Castano. And yeah, ultimately, when Castano is on the inside, he needs to work. He needs to maintain just a little bit of space so he can get his punches off. I've got a feeling that the referee in this fight might be breaking these guys up quite a lot. So Brian Castano can't afford to go too far in and then smother himself and enable the referee to make these guys reset, because the more times Brian Castano resets, the more times Jermell Charlo has to time this guy coming in. So, Brian Castano's positioning on the inside, once he's there, needs to be spot on in this fight. And yeah, ultimately, Brian Castano needs to go in there with a great work rate, great stamina, great cardio, a great high guard, and he needs to be on Jermell Charlo like white on rice. I don't really see this guy winning a boxing match on the outside. I don't think he's got the physical attributes to do so. I think he's got the skill set to trouble Charlo on the outside, but to win a decision, in my opinion, no. So yeah, in this fight, Brian Castano needs to be all of the way in for as long as possible. If he does that, I think he's got a good chance of winning this fight. But as for Jermell Charlo in this fight, he needs to halt the forward momentum of Brian Castano. We know how Brian Castano fights. If you've seen one Brian Castano fight, you've basically seen it all. And I don't mean that as a disservice. He can do a lot of things in there, but he fights coming forwards, forward gear kind of thing. So Jermell Charlo needs to halt that forward momentum. I think that it would be ideal for Jermell Charlo to actually tag Brian Castano early on with a shot which he actually feels, kind of thing, to put this guy in his place and make him realise that, yeah, you might get on the inside, but you're taking a risk to get there. You need to really try and sow a seed of doubt into Brian Castano's mind, because Brian Castano is one of those guys, if you can't get his respect, he will keep on coming with little fear, as we saw in his fight with Patrick Teixeira. So I think Jermell Charlo, early on in this fight, kind of needs to be holding his feet but taking a half step back, trying to draw Brian Castano in, and then, coming down the middle with that straight right hand, or hooking around the side with that left hook, or even trying to half step back and throw an uppercut as Brian Castano comes forwards. I think, like I say, it would do very well for Jermell Charlo for him to catch Brian Castano with something big early on, just to try and domesticate him, and, to try and make Castano second guess himself, if you will. And, I think Jermell Charlo in this fight needs to be a lot more consistent with his jab than he has been in several fights in the past. Sometimes Jermell Charlo is guilty of looking for the perfect shot kind of thing. Sometimes he kind of fights with that puncher's style where he's like pouring with his lead hands and he'll look for a big shot. In this fight, he needs to be a lot more consistent with that jab. I don't want to see Jermell Charlo revert to that sort of puncher style which he fought Tony Harrison with in their first fight, because Tony Harrison managed to basically pickpocket him and outbox him in a close fight. If Jermell Charlo kind of goes into that style in this fight, he could get outworked. Brian Castano throws a lot of punches, so Jermell needs to, in my opinion, be a lot more active than he's been in certain previous fights of his. And, to me, that starts with the jab. You're in there with a much smaller man, shorter man. So pop that jab, as they say in the States, pop that stick on a consistent basis. Take that half step back, pop the jab, and try and keep on making Brian Castano reset. Now, of course, in this fight, I would imagine there's going to be occasions in which Brian Castano does get to the inside. And in those moments, I expect Brian Castano to actually have quite a lot of success. And Jermell Charlo may not win these battles on the inside, but when Brian Castano is on the inside, or even at mid-range, I would like to see Jermell Charlo try to work that body a little bit. I actually think Jermell Charlo is a pretty good body puncher when he commits to the body. Again, sometimes he's not consistent with it, but in this fight, I think the body attack of Jermell Charlo is another area in which could actually give him a lot of success, because Castano's a pressure fighter. He throws a lot of punches. Very fit guy, very strong guy, great stamina. So why not try and work that body as Brian Castano is up close kind of thing. He might outland you on the inside, but if you land some telling body shots, that could actually have a big effect down the stretch and slow Castano down and make him more susceptible to power shots on the outside or even at mid-range. And ultimately, I think the style that Jermell Charlo needs to fight in this fight is like a hybrid boxer-puncher / counter-puncher type style. Castano at times does take risks. Sometimes he will abandon the head movement, the double jab, the high guard to get to the inside, and he'll lunge in. Obviously, Jermell needs to be looking out for those moments, for when to counter. And again, Jermell needs to be out there, trying to be a bit more dynamic than he's been in certain previous fights. And what I mean by that is actually trying to make Brian Castano commit, trying to set traps for Brian Castano, throw a feint, half step back and, draw Castano in and throw the uppercut or short right hands. Again, Brian Castano's a guy who loves that forward momentum, that's his style, so you offering him encouragement to try and get up close can be used against Brian Castano, and Jermell Charlo needs to be looking at that in this fight in order to basically set traps for hard counter punches. And to me this fight is the battle of the inside fighter / pressure fighter versus the boxer puncher / counter puncher. It's a really interesting fight in my opinion. And, this one, I keep on going back and forth in my mind who's going to win. If it was in a different location, my prediction might be a bit different, to be honest. And I can see this being one of those fights in which is somewhat controversial. I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but I do believe that there's a strong possibility that this fight could be one of those occasions. So, wouldn't be shocked to see a controversial decision. But all in all, my official prediction for this fight is Jermell Charlo on points. Wouldn't be surprised if Jermell Charlo maybe drops him once and wins a competitive fight on the cards. Again, don't be shocked if it's controversial, but my official prediction is Jermell Charlo on points. But I fully envisage this one being a fun fight, a competitive fight, and ultimately a risky fight for both guys. So all in all, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's a great fight on paper. Undisputed, of course, at 154. May the best man win at the end of the day. I've got Jermell Charlo on points. What about you guys? Who are you picking to win this fight? It's been your guy Delboy. Peace.